Hello, everyone. I am Jacqueline Garcia, and I'm here to welcome you into our second webinar in a row, or 2 weeks in a row. We started last week with a intro to how you can incorporate web services in your development strategies. And today we're going to be walking you through how you can do that with our open source solution, Harmony Core. You guys are all currently muted, but we'll have time at the end for questions where I can allow you to unmute yourself and ask them. And we've got our same presenters back again this week. Our longtime member of our professional services staff recently transitioned to product manager, Steve Ives. And also on the line is our the original developer of Harmony Core and technical lead for it currently, our principal engineer, Jeff Crane. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and let Steve get started. A little bit too far. We're going to go.
Excuse me. Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. So yeah, as Jacqueline mentioned last week, we did a presentation about concepts and how to go about doing something, and some of the or you leveraging web services and some of the reasons you might want to do so. This week, all we want to do is physically give you a demonstration of actually doing that and actually building some web services with Harmony Core. There are various kinds of web services that you can expose. As I mentioned last week, there are data-centric things and code-centric things where you actually write code to make things happen in the web service. This morning, I'm going to focus purely on data-centric things, that we take a repository and we generate certain types of information from it, certain types of endpoints that let you read a collection of, or retrieve a collection of something, retrieve a single one, retrieve something by alternate keys, perhaps, create, update, delete, that kind of thing. If necessary, we may well schedule another webcation in the future at some point to talk about some of the extra stuff, some of the code-centric stuff, and so on. So we'll take things one step at a time. I'm going to start completely from scratch this morning. With Harmony Core, there are two templates that you can use. There is one that produces a completely pre-configured environment with our sample data, repository, and so on. So you literally create the project and it's ready to run. There's also a template, and that template is called Harmony Demo. There's also a template called Harmony Core, which basically produces the same environment, but there's no pre-generated code. You have to configure everything from scratch. And you may think that sounds a little bit ambitious in the context of a 30-minute webinar, but hopefully, well, if the demo gods are with us this morning, hopefully you'll see that's not the case. You'll notice I'm at the command prompt right now because that's where everything starts. So my starting point this morning is I've got Synergy installed, 11.11c. I've got Visual Studio 2019 installed. I've got the .NET Core SDK because Harmony Core is a .NET Core environment. And I've got a couple of ancillary tools. I've got a tool called Postman that you'll see later, and I've got a plugin in my Chrome browser that is going to format and color code JSON for me, just to make things a little bit more readable when I'm looking at the results of operations. So that's it. I haven't done any prep other than that. What I'm going to do first of all is execute a .NET command, which is, this is the way you get the project templates. So if you've got a completely blank environment, then this command will download from NuGet a package, and these are all of the .NET Core solution and project and item templates. And you'll notice we've now got three, two of which include Harmony Core and Harmony Demo. So executing that command was .NET new -I harmony.core.project templates. Gets me the templates from which I can create a project. I am going to go very quickly, by the way. All of this, everything you're going to see this morning is documented on our wiki in a step-by-step fashion. So you can follow a tutorial on the wiki and do exactly what you're going to see this morning if you wish to do so. So don't be furiously scribbling things down, just watch and get an overview. So I'm going to use the Harmony Core solution, which is the empty one. So the next command I'm going to run is a .NET new to create a new project. I'm using the Harmony Core project template, and I'm giving it an output folder. So I'm creating a folder called My Demo API. That, by default, will also become the name of the solution that I'm creating. If I wanted to, I could use the -n option to override the name of the solution within the folder as well. But we'll just go ahead and create that solution. So what it does is provide various solution files, project files, whatever else is in those pre-configured environments. And now it's doing a NuGet restore on each of those projects to pull down any dependency, NuGet packages, and so on. And you'll see we got a message there saying restore succeeded. So briefly, let's see what we got from that. I'm going to CD into the My Demo API folder that was created, and you'll see if any of you have ever worked in Visual Studio, this will look fairly familiar. We've got a Visual Studio solution file. We've got various subfolders that have various projects within those folders. We'll take a look through what they are a little bit more in Visual Studio in a few minutes' time. We also, even though this template is not pre-configured, we do provide the repository schema for our sample repository, and we do provide a folder containing our sample data. So if you want to start from scratch, but using our sample environment so that you can follow our online tutorials, then this template does let you do that. All I'm going to do is take the name of the Visual Studio solution, and we're going to execute that as a command to launch Visual Studio, and we should see our development environment. The first thing I'm going to do, oops, not sure why it's opened up into that project. First thing I'm going to do is just remember to set the services host project. That's the host project is the self-hosting project that when I want to run my services, that's the program that I run that actually hosts all of the services. And I'm going to do a second thing, which is I'm going to do a rebuild on my repository project and make sure I get a message down here saying one succeeded. So we've now incorporated the repository schema into actual repository data files. So we're ready to go. We've got a repository up and running. If I briefly look at the repository from my Visual Studio environment, you'll see that our sample environment consists of 5 primary data files. We have customers. Those customers have orders. Those orders have items. Have order items. Those order items are for inventory items, and those inventory items are provided by vendors. And there are relationships, joins essentially between all of these files, as you would expect in a hierarchical fashion. And you'll see that being demonstrated later. As well as the structures, within structures, obviously, we've got fields defined, keys defined, tags defined if necessary. We also have files defined so that we've got the definitions of the customer's file is assigned to the customer's structure, and there's the physical file name that gets opened if we need to access this file. So this is just a normal Synergy repository. If you've already got repository set up, if you've ever used Report Writer or ODBC, you're probably in great shape to do this stuff. And you should be able to start doing exactly what I'm doing pretty much straight away. If not, then there's a little bit of work to do to set up the repository. Excuse me. So the environment contains various projects and various solution items. I beg your pardon. I'm not going to go through these projects in detail because we do so on the website tutorial again. So if you want an explanation of what all these things are, but they're fairly obvious. Data models go here. Web service controllers go here. Services is kind of the overall configuration for the environment, and the hosting program that hosts the whole thing. So it's logically split up into pieces. One of the most important pieces right now, although we are in the process of improving this, is our regeneration file. So this is a batch file that is pre-configured to be able to generate certain things in certain scenarios. So what's in here basically is a whole bunch of code gen commands that are used under different scenarios, different circumstances to generate different types of code, different types of files, and so on. And then at the top of this file, there's a section of options. So you can see all of these options that are currently all commented out in the base solution enable certain things. So if you want to expose an endpoint that is a collection of all records, you enable get all. If you want to retrieve records by their primary key, you enable get one. If you want to be able to update records, you enable put or delete or patch or whatever it is you want. So by removing these comments, you enable functionality in the web service. One of the most important things in this file is this list of structures that are going to be processed. And again, I'm not going to go into detail about what all this stuff is, but again, we discuss it in depth in the online tutorials, and there's a description of what all these things are. But in its simple terms, this is a list of structures in the repository that we want to generate code for, and therefore expose things from our web service. So I'm going to take all my 5 major structures and tell it to process all of them. And then I'm going to turn on a set of options that will give me a fairly comprehensive OData web service. The tutorial walks you through these things one by one and explains what they are and shows you what each one does and what code it causes to be generated. But I'm going to say I want an OData environment. I want to do self-hosting. I do want to create test data files. And I'm going to enable get one, get all. We'll have API versioning. We'll generate postman tests. I'm going to go through all of these things and show you what they are during the demonstration. We will enable endpoints so I can retrieve things by their alternate key. I can get all customers in California, for example. Yeah, sure, we'll have count endpoints. We'll have the ability to use OData select and filter and order by. Let's do relations, and we'll have put, patch, and delete endpoints. That should be a pretty good set of functionality. I'm avoiding post for the time being, which is a create, because if I do that, I have to explain a whole bunch of additional stuff. The difference between post and put in Harmony Core and in many RESTful services is that post, you are creating a new entity, but you have to plug in custom code to automatically generate the primary keys for those entities on the server side. Because obviously, if a client's generating a new order, for example, they don't get to pick the order number, you do in code. So we don't probably have time to go through that aspect in the context of a 30-minute demonstration that we're halfway through already. But we'll cover that at some point. And again, it's going to be discussed in the tutorial. So that'll do me. That's what. Oh, let's turn on IIS support as well, so that I can host this thing inside IIS if I want to at some point in the future. Although we won't be doing that today. I'm going to save the changes to that file, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute the batch file. So I'm going to simply go down to the command prompt. It'll put me into whatever my current project is. So I'm going to go up one level to where the batch file is, into the solution directory. And I'm going to run the script file. And you'll see whenever you run this file, you look for the word done. If you see the word done at the end, it's signifying that there were no errors above. But essentially, if we look back, you'll see that it's generated all kinds of code. It's generated, these are what are called data model classes that describe the Synergy records with properties. These are metadata classes that provide additional information in great detail about those data models to Harmony Core. We've also got some controller classes. These are the web service endpoints, the web service controllers that expose the different types of functionality that we selected through some of those options. We've got a DB context that exposes the data at runtime. We've got something called an entity data model builder that builds the entity data model, that knows about all the data types and the relationships. And we've got some startup code that configures the whole environment. And we've got a self-hosting program and some code that sets up the environment for the self-hosting program. We've also generated some postman tests so that we can test everything in the postman utility. So we generated a bunch of code. The next thing to do is to add that code into the various projects. So I'm going to do that very quickly. I'm going to go through models and say add existing item. And I'm going to add all of that code that was generated into the models project. I'm going to do the same with the host project and add the self-hosting program in. I'm going to do the same with the web service controllers and add all of the controllers into the project. I'm going to do the same with the services configuration code. Okay, and that should be everything. So at this point, I am going to cheat one little bit, and that is with Harmony Core, we give you a sample homepage, but with the basic solution, that homepage has very little on it. So what I'm going to do is take the homepage that we ship from the pre-configured solution, And I'm just going to drop that into my services project just so that we've got the shortcuts and things available that would normally only be there in the fully pre-configured demo environment. At this point, in theory, I should be good to build and run. So let's try and do a solution rebuild. And hopefully, if the demo gods are with us, everything should build just fine. So this is the typical process you go through. You identify the repository structures you want to use. You identify the options you want to use, what you want to generate. You generate the code. You plug it into your environment. Depending on where your files are and logical names and things like that, you might have a little bit of extra work to do to say, here's where we're going to get environment variables from and that kind of thing. In the sample environment with our sample data, the environment will take care of that automatically. And there's a whole discussion about how that works in the online documentation as well. As you can see, everything built. We've got the host program, which is the host program is just literally a console application that loads up the web services. ASP.NET Core includes something called Kestrel, which is a mini web server, highly performant web server. And that tends to be what is used to serve .NET Core web services through a console application. Even if you're hosting in IIS, the console application is still there, and IIS spins it up and manages it and hosts it for you. Okay, let's see what this thing looks like. So I'm going to just hit run to run the hosting application. And what it's going to do, hopefully, is start things up, and it's going to tell us we've got some documentation available here, and it's going to tell us the URLs that it's listening at. So I'm going to take this URL, which is the HTTP one. If we go to the HTTPS one, if we go to the HTTP one, we'll simply redirect to the HTTPS one. And then I'm simply going to open a browser. There's our presentation from earlier, and we'll paste that URL into the browser. And there's our home page. So we refresh just in case it's a stored one. So this is the sample homepage this is actually the homepage from the Harmony demo solution. If you use the normal Harmony core solution, all you see is this very top piece with the service document and the service metadata. So every service, every OData service exposes what's called a service document. That service document tells you the entities it knows about. So it's telling me, I know about customers, and this is the URL that thing is at. So if I copy that and go to that URL, literally just tag that onto here, what I should see is a collection of all of the customers that are available. Now, in our data set, we only have 38 customers, so it's a fairly small amount of data. You might think to yourself, would I ever expose all customers, all orders, or whatever through a web service? And the answer is, with OData, yes, you would. The reason is, as you'll learn very shortly, that the whole power of OData is in exposing one simple endpoint that says all customers and allowing client developers to choose exactly how they want to interact with that endpoint, exactly what data they want to retrieve, just like a database developer would do with an SQL statement. Okay, so there's your first example of all customers. Now, obviously, if I do the same thing for, let's do vendors, then here's all of our vendor information as well. So you'll see we've got the basic web service up and running. Let's go back to that little home page. Let's look at some other examples. There is also, every OData service also exposes a metadata document. This is a document that there are industry standard tools around that will take the information in this document, and if you actually read it, it defines all of the data types. So there's the definition of the properties in the customer data type. And if you read all of this code, it's describing all of the endpoints that are available to deal with that data type and what the service can do. So tooling can download and read this file and generate client-side JavaScript libraries, for example, that allow you to easily interact with these services. That's the idea of metadata. Why did I close that window? Okay, let's go back there. So this is where we were at. We also generate documentation. So this is what's called Swagger UI. Swagger is it's now called Open Document API or something like that. It's basically an industry standard way of documenting web services. Under the hood, there is what's called a Swagger file, which is this guy. This UI is simply interpreting the contents of that file and formatting it and presenting it like this. So this is a summary of all of the entity types and all of the different operations that you can do with those entity types. And then there's also descriptions of all of the data types that are returned by the service. And you can actually execute the service from here. So again, if I go to the get operation, ignore these for the time being, but if I hit the try it out button and then say execute, there's all the data that just came back about customers. So this thing is interactive, and you can use it to use all of the OData queries that I'm going to show you in the next 9 minutes. So documentation is really cool. Let's go back and look at some of the other things that OData can do. So we've already seen the end. Now, for each of these data types, these links are just samples of things that you can do with OData. So I'm not going to go through these directly right now. We've already seen that if we go to all customers, we get all customers. You can also use the primary key endpoints. So OData likes parentheses for parameters. So if I say 8, then I will get the customer whose primary key is 8. If it was an alpha primary key, I'd use single quotes to deliver that data. So there's our get one endpoints that we selected. Very cool. Let's look at some of the things that OData does, though. OData has various keywords. Like I said, think of it as SQL for web services. So one of the keywords in OData is the $select keyword. Okay, this is what $select does. Off of customer 8, you'll see I've said query $select equals customer number, name, city, and credit limit. So it allows me to select or constrain the properties that come back for the entity that I've provided. Okay, if I want to, of course, I could use that same $select query against my all customers endpoint. And now I get those 4 properties for all customers. So select allows you to constrain the properties that come back. The next cool feature is using $filter. I'm just going to click on a pre-done example so that we're not wasting too much time. But here's an example of filtering. So we've got customers, all customers, selecting customer number, name, city, and credit limit. And now I'm filtering by city equals, that's a single quote, San space Pablo. Okay, so when I typed this in, that was a single quoted with a space in there, but obviously the browser has turned those characters. It's done a URL encode on it. So this is basically filtering on city equals San Pablo. And you've got full Boolean, and or not. You can use parentheses to combine complex expressions and all of the things you would expect. So you can get very, very complex with some of these filtering capabilities. So filter lets you constrain the rows that come back in addition to using select to constrain the columns. We also have an order by capability. So again, I'm just going to click on a pre-created link. So this is a similar query. If you look at the previous one, the first one that came back was customer 1 with a credit limit of 2,000, then customer 19 with a credit limit of 3,000. What I asked it to do here was order by credit limit descending. So now it essentially flipped them around. So just like you can with SQL, ascending or descending, you can specify the order of things. Okay, pretty cool. You can basically home in on exactly the data that you want as a client developer. In most other types of web services, the web service developer would have to develop a specific piece of code, a specific endpoint to enable each of these individual features, and I'm not talking about at the select level. They would have to expose a method that exposes customer name, city, credit limit only for the customers in a town and in credit limit descending. That would be a very specific piece of code that somebody would have to write. With OData, you just expose customers and you're done. Very powerful. But that's not the coolest stuff. The coolest stuff is when you start to work with joins or relationships between files. Because they're defined in the repository and because we enabled that piece of functionality in our code generation batch file, then we can do things like this. So this query, let me clean up a little bit here. This query basically says, again, I'm going on my customer's endpoint, so all customers, but selecting customer number and name, filtering by city equals San Pablo again, but $expand equals rel orders. So here is customer one, and here are the orders for customer one. So we've followed a join. If we scoot down that piece of data, here's customer 19, and here's the orders for customer 19. So we've traversed that join, and we're now bringing back customers and their orders. Equally, I can also, all of the filter, expand, select stuff that I can use at the highest level, I can also put parentheses on the end of here and do the same thing within the second level, the orders, or the third level, or the fourth level. So again, if I follow that link, what we've got here is, this is following a third level. Okay, so here's customers, here's an order, and here's item 1 on the order, item 2 on the order, item 3, item 4. There's the next order. So actually, it's the next customer because there was only one order for that customer. So now we're traversing 3 levels. Okay, here's a query, just one query that actually went through 5 ISAM files, joining 4 times. So now what we're doing is bringing back selected information about an order. About a customer. Here's the customer's first order. There's the first item on the order. I missed a level here somewhere. Where are we? Hang on. There's a customer. There's an order. There's the item on the order. That's the actual inventory item. Oh, I guess we're missing a level. I thought it normally went down to the vendor. Oh, the vendor is not showing up. We've got a problem somewhere in our data by the look of it. I do apologize. There should be a 5th level there, which is the vendor. But you get the idea. Very, very powerful. You can also not just do totally hierarchical joins. You can do joins at any level. So the final example I'm going to show you is this one. And here what we're doing, if you read the URL, is we're going items 6. So we're going to a specific inventory item, and we're asking it to expand our relationship to vendor and order items. So here's an inventory item. Here is the vendor that item comes from, and here are any order items for that particular piece of inventory. And if we scoot that down again, okay, we're going off our individual items endpoint. If we go off our all items endpoint, this probably is a mistake because this will take quite a while. It's a big data set, but you can see the data. The query is pretty much finished. What's taking the time here, you'll see the browser is saying, "Oh, this is pretty big. Are you sure you want to do this?" And it takes the browser a little while to load it in. But there we go. Now we've gone through all items and the vendor for each, and all the items for each. So at 8:29, I was going to show you create, update, delete in Postman. But you know what? Let's leave that for the next time. I think this is a pretty good place to break this. We're exactly on time. And next time we'll talk about how do we do create, update, delete. And next time we'll start to get into a little bit more information about how we do custom code endpoints and the various mechanisms for doing that. So let's go back over here and do that. And Jacqueline, if you would like to step in and unmute everybody. Any questions, anybody?
Yeah, you use the term OData. Is that your product, or is that a third-party product, or is that just a term?
OData is a convention, a standard, a set of technologies, if you like. It started off being a Microsoft thing many, many years ago, and Microsoft successfully had it adopted by a much wider scope. So now it's an industry standard open source thing. There are lots of products that use OData. There are lots of there are lots of products generally that use OData. So if you want to find out more about OData, their primary website is odata.org. So no, it's an open source industry standard technology, as is everything that we build Harmony Core with.
Thank you.
Sure.
So all our data is on our VMS system. So how can we access them too?
XF Server, essentially. Harmony Core is a .NET Core, ASP.NET web service, RESTful web service. And if your Synergy data is on a remote system, be that system a remote Windows box or Linux, Unix, OpenVMS, then we would access that data via XF server running on that VMS system.
Or through traditional bridge that also runs natively on VMS.
Right. So So my initial comment was for OData, for the data related stuff. As Jeff just mentioned, we also have a mechanism for going over the wire through an SSH tunnel to, let's say, an OpenVMS system and running custom code. So you could think of that as it's not really a replacement for, but you could think of it as a better way of doing what you may have done with XF Server Plus in the past. Part of the code-centric stuff that we do with Harmony Core, that code could be running in .NET directly in the web service, or it could use traditional bridge to go out over the wire or in process on the same machine to a traditional Synergy environment and run traditional Synergy subroutines and functions to receive, interact with, and return data that go out through the RESTful Web API, just like the OData stuff does. And we'll get into all of that side of things in subsequent webinars.